let me just, I don't know if I said this last time. It's been a few months since we talked about Islam, because I remember you were deathly sick too as well. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I said this, but I did a search on TikTok for, I typed in Catholic and Catholicism, and there were 3 billion views for Catholic. All right. And there were about 100,000 for Catholicism. I typed in Christian, just more general. And I think there were something like 10, 20 billion views. I typed in Islam for fun. There were 130 billion views. Like, wow. Dwarfs Christianity times 50. And that's not exact math. I'm just hyperbolizing here. But the fact that dwarfs Christianity, all of Christianity. And Christianity is bigger than Islam. I mean, we have more than 1 billion members than they do. And yet they're probably 10 times more prominent on some of these platforms than we are, and preaching a false message that's not from God, not from Jesus, not from the angel Gabriel. And that's what they claim. They claim that the angel Gabriel, who appeared to who appeared to Mary, also appeared to Muhammad in a cave, except that he came with a different message and a different gospel. And Paul says, if you come with a different gospel, then your message is not from God and you should be accursed. So I don't know where you want to start, but maybe we could start with like a review from last time, and then we could pick up from there.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. Even if an angel from heaven preaches a different gospel, it's funny how you have Islam and also Mormons, They also claim they have an angel come and give a different gospel. Yeah. So Islam, I think for Catholics is terra incognito, right? Most Catholics don't know. I mean, they'll see people in burqas or, their hijab or whatever, and they might be familiar with movies. Of course, a lot of that's sanitized. But what Islam teaches and where we agree and where we disagree, I think most Catholics don't have a clue.
Yeah. I think many people might, when they think of Islam, they might think of the World Trade Center. They might think of fundamentalists. They might think of jihad terrorists and that sort of thing, extremists, but as most people don't realize is they're not the extremists. That's what Islam stood for most of their history. Like, they're holding on to the true and original Islam, while most of them have, kind of come over to the liberal side today and the nice side. They don't care, you're good, I'm good, we're all good. We all just believe in a different, message. A lot of Muslims have spiritualized their message, which is good for the rest of the world in some sense. But, many of them still hold to the fundamental principles that Islam means submission, and everyone submits to Allah. And that happens by, your free will or by force. You either do it, willingly, or, you become a second-class citizen, or you find the sword and you lose your head that way. But either way, you're going to come to Islam because that is what Allah has dictated. Now, many, we talked about this last time, but many Muslims lie and are allowed to lie in the cause of Islam if it converts people. And what they will tell you is that the word Islam means peace, which is a lie. The word salama in Islam means lie. It means peace, but the word Islam means submission. And many of them will tell you that today. In fact, on TikTok, Instagram, and different places, they have these really annoying, uneducated, and intellectual responses that they just regurgitate over and over and over again. It's kind of frustrating, but they'll say that everyone in the world is Muslim. All the prophets were Muslim. Jesus was a Muslim. Abraham was a Muslim. Adam and Eve were Muslim. Why? Because Islam means submit. Well, what did Jesus do? He submitted to God. What did Abraham do? He submitted to God. All the prophets were faithful to God, so they're all Muslim. Islam didn't start with Muhammad. That's just the modern day, whatever. It goes back to Adam and Eve who submitted to God. And I was like, I hate to break it to you, but they didn't submit to God, and they kind of sinned against God and brought death into the entire world. So there's that. But either way, I say it takes more than just one belief to make a religion, okay? Just because someone submits to God does not make them Muslim, does not make them part of the religion of Islam. We both believe in one God. That doesn't mean you're Catholic. That doesn't mean I'm Muslim. Just because we share a similar belief, and submission is a belief that a lot of religions share a similarity in. That's like me saying, oh, well, really, I'm not Muslim. You're not Muslim. No, the whole religion of Islam, they're Catholic. Do you want to know why? Because Catholic means universal, and everyone's part of this universe, therefore everyone's Catholic. I was like, this is the kind of logic that you people are trying to use, and it's ridiculous. And you're all trying to force it down everyone's throat. You all have the same talking points. You all haven't done any research. You don't pick up any books, and then you condemn anyone else and everyone else for not doing research, not picking up books, and not doing anything except that you didn't, except you watch a few videos of your own people, you take a few arguments and just regurgitate them, and there you have Islamic apologetics in a nutshell.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's my experience as well. It's that, it's just these talking points, and they don't think critically of their own positions. So they throw out arguments that, like you said, it's paper thin and it's super easy to debunk, but they think it's bulletproof. It's very strange, to get them to think critically about their own positions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
for sure.
And it's important to point that out, as far as the, the extremists are actually the traditionalists in Islam. And it's amazing how much Western culture has invaded Islam, where, the more peaceful Muslims are really the ones that are more influenced by Christianity than anything else. But yeah, so you got weird
World
things
War
like that. Yeah.
I might just say World War II had an effect on that too, because they sided with Hitler in World War II. And when they got annihilated, and didn't win that war, a lot fell out of the bottom of them, so to speak, and they lost a lot of their power. And even in I believe it was 1967, there was a 3-day war where 5 countries attacked Israel all at once. 5 surrounding countries wanted to retake Israel, and Israel wiped them out in 3 days. And after, they've never been the same since. They haven't had the same armies. They suffer from a lack of centrality. They used to have a caliph, which is like a pope, who centralized their, who kind of ran everything. Now ever since, those days, and especially since becoming westernized, World War II, all of it together, it's not, they've lost a lot of who they are. But there are a lot of people in the world, and some experts say maybe even up to 50% of people in the world still hold to ancient Islam and would go to war even today for the cause of Islam.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Isn't I thought ISIS was trying to establish a new caliphate, right? I mean,
yeah, I've heard that.
That's part of their, the modus operandi.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're definitely out there, for sure. So I think it's important to have a clear understanding of, what are the distinctives of Islam? How does it differ from Christianity? Yeah,
well, before, maybe I could back up a little bit, before we even get there, it differs in the person who founded the religion. Like, for example, Jesus founded our religion, right? Muhammad founded their religion. Now, an angel appeared to Mary, and an angel was claimed to appear to Muhammad. No, so you have 2 similar accounts. Now, atheists and anti-Christians will say that Islam and Christianity were basically 2 of the same religion. You're both barbaric, you're both uncivilized, and you both killed a lot of people, but eventually you became noble, you became westernized, and then you all calmed down. That's not the way it is. And after the break, maybe we can, unwrap all that and pack it all.
Yeah. And right before the break, Brian, you were making an interesting point about how atheists kind of view Islam and Christianity as kind of 2 peas in the pod, that they start out barbaric and then they become westernized and tame. And in fact, that kind of squares with something I said at the very beginning of the program, that a lot of time us Westerners, we kind of project Christianity on Islam. And we think of it as like another form of Christianity, when it's very foreign, very different in many ways.
Yes, exactly. It's completely different in many ways. And while we share some similarities, which we can talk about, we share some very big core differences, big core differences. And in fact, Islam was started, as we said last time, a couple months ago, by a man named Muhammad. And he started it in the early 600s, around 620. And he was actually starting to preach this new message that the angel supposedly gave them, even though, if anyone wasn't tuned in last time, we talked about how it wasn't an angel. In fact, he thought it was a demon originally, and the demon shook him roughly and told him him to read, and he said he could, and he kept shaking him so violently, so much so that he was suicidal over this, and he was like so distressed by this. And he ended up confiding in his wife, who was 15 years older than him. He was 25 and she was 40, and she convinced him that it was an angel in this most silly way possible. And this is recounted in the original biography of Muhammad. And it's like, if you sit on my lap, on this lap, and and I feel something, or on this side of my lap, and it's just ridiculous. But she convinced him that it was an angel. And so he started preaching this message. He wasn't welcome. He got kicked out by the pagans, and they chased him out of town. He ended up going to Medina, where he raised an army, and he came back to Mecca, and they surrendered to him. And he ended up combining all of the clans of Islam and conquering the whole Fertile Crescent of the Middle East that we know today. So in other words, he got kicked out. He didn't turn his cheek. He raised an army, and he conquered everyone around him. And over the next 100 years, Islam would conquer everything from Afghanistan to the Middle East, up into northern Africa and southern Europe, pretty much all the islands and half the world we know. Now, Christianity, on the other hand, Jesus was also persecuted. He was also chased out of town several times. He was also attacked and finally crucified, against his will. And on the cross, he prayed for his enemies. He loved them into his death. And when he rose, he didn't raise an army. He gathered his apostles, and he taught them to go out and love the world and teach them all that I have commanded you. And so that's how Christianity started. They went out to the world and they preached the gospel of Jesus Christ. They preached how he died and rose again. They preached his love, his mercy, his forgiveness. And the gospel and Christian missionaries for the next 1,000 years just went out and converted the world through peace and love, and without wars and without harsh words and without any of these things that you see in Islam. It wasn't the sword or die. And a lot of people think it was. They say, oh, well, look at Constantine. Well, Constantine wasn't Catholic. He fought in the cause of Christianity, and he protected Christians and allowed them to worship freely. And he allowed them not to be killed and maimed and be slaves underground and that sort of thing. So, the Catholic Church did not go to war at all in the early days. In fact, they were killed and they had to be protected. That was the big difference between Islam and Muhammad. I mean, Muhammad and Islam, they went to war for 1,100 years. I mean, it wasn't until 770 AD that Charles the Hammer Martel in France finally stopped this notorious army of conquering Islamic warriors. And he and his French Franks stopped them cold and, pretty much put a stop to them. But even after that, it would be another 700 years until they were really stopped fully, at the different battles, like the Battle of Vienna and also the land battles as well. And Christianity never had a history like that. Christianity has had its problems, but nothing like that. So as far as history, the two religions are completely and totally different, and the theology is as well.
Yeah. Now, hold on a second. Now, what about the Crusades? Weren't the Crusades, wasn't that the offensive armies of the Pope forcing conversions and taking property?
Yes. Yeah, that's right, Brian. Come on. You conveniently left that little tidbit out. I mean, clearly the Catholic Church had 7, 8, 9 crusades, depending on how you number them through history. And they conquered innocent people like the Jews. They conquered peaceful people like the Muslims, and they conquered people who were minding their own business like the Byzantines. Come on, Brian. But in reality, the Crusades were still totally and completely different because they were wars of self-defense, believe it or not. And the Crusades were actually started to protect people, not to conquer anybody. And we have the Pope's actual letters of what the Crusades were about. He wrote a letter outlining the 3 reasons why the Crusades were going to be started. And in fact, at this time, Islam had just destroyed the entire Roman Empire, obliterated the entire Persian Empire, and now had conquered half of the Byzantine Empire, which was the last major empire on earth. If they had conquered it, they would have overrun the entire world. They would have we would be speaking Arabic probably. But it was at this time that the Byzantine emperor, he had left the Catholic Church, right? The Orthodox separated 50 years earlier from the Catholic Church. So they weren't in good standing with Rome. And they had the audacity to reach out to Rome and beg for help. They said, we are in dire need. We're in desperate straits. I know we've had our differences in the past, but it would behoove us to come together, and we need your help. All these innocent people are going to die. And the Pope prayed about it for a year. He wasn't like just, oh, we're going to go to war. Now, keep in mind that Catholics had been being killed around the world for 600 years. What did the Pope do? Nothing. He just prayed and hoped it would stop. What did Christians do? In most cases, they just prayed and hoped it would stop. Certain individuals like Charles the Hammer Martel and others defended their countries, but the church as a whole never did anything until the Commodore Alexius I, the Byzantine emperor, called the Pope for help. And when he did, the Pope finally said in his letter, we are going to help our brothers in the East. That was the primary goal for starting the Crusades, was to protect the Byzantine Empire, to help their brothers, and to stop the slaughter of people being killed innocently. The second reason was to take back the Holy Land, speaking of innocent slaughter, because many pilgrims from around the world would make notorious pilgrimages to the Holy Land, and they wanted to make penance for their sins, but oftentimes they were killed on the way because it was very dangerous, or the Muslims would come and just wipe out unarmed pilgrims, just wipe out the whole band. In fact, on one particular day, the Seljuk Turks came out of the south and wiped out 12,000 unarmed pilgrims. And so what the Catholic Church wanted to do simultaneously is take back the Holy Land and set up a perimeter on the way to the Holy Land that would protect pilgrims from who were going there, so that they could really travel safely, pray, do penance, and do all the things that they were set out to do. So the first thing was to protect the Byzantines, to protect the empire, and to help innocent people who were dying. Number two, to take back the Holy Land, protect pilgrims, and make a safe passage there. And number three, they wanted to set up outposts around the different parts of the Christian empire, like the Knights Templar would set up posts and protect pilgrims there, because just too many people were being killed innocently, and they wanted to save as much life as possible. So those were the three motives for starting the Crusades. It had nothing to do with killing people. It had nothing to do with stealing lands, getting gold, killing Muslims, taking Jews. And in fact, the Pope had told the Crusaders to stay away from the Jews, to stay away from the Greeks, to stay away from the Byzantines and all of that. And so, they had a very set guideline of rules they had to follow. Unfortunately, kings and emperors don't always listen to popes. They like to listen to themselves, and they fancy themselves to be the highest leaders in the world. And as we know, the Crusade has a sort of a sordid, difficult history, because different kings did different things their own way and refused to listen to the Pope, refused to listen to the rules, and even charlatans and people who had their own agendas who were joining, and everyone thought they were on the same page, went awry and did their own thing. Like, for example, just one small group of the entire Crusade army left the Crusade army, even though they weren't supposed to. Even though the Pope said they weren't supposed to, they went down this one strip and started murdering Jewish people. And the Pope found out about it later, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he excommunicated them. But the Crusades get the bad rap for killing Jews when that never happened. Some rogue crusaders killed Jews, but the Pope condemned them fiercely for that, and that was never part of the Crusade agenda, and it never was supposed to be. It was all about taking back the Holy Land and protecting people.
Yeah, very good stuff. We often forget about the prehistory to the Crusades, and like you laid out very nicely, it was only after centuries of encroachment that ultimately the Pope and the Church reacted. And it was purely defensive. But, the modern spin is that, that was the Christian offensive, and it's because of the Crusades, all these bad things happened. A narrative that didn't come about until like the 1900s. I mean, the whole idea of Crusaders. Yeah, it's very recent, wasn't it?
Yeah, even under Islamic scholars, even under Islamic history, they literally changed history. This is how dishonest these people are, or uneducated, or both. But they they talked about the Crusades as history. They admitted their battles. I have tons of books here that talk about the Islamic conquest written by Muslims, talking about their expansion without a problem. But somewhere around like the late, I don't know, 17, 18, 1900s, they started to change their narrative. Oh, no, it was the Crusaders. And they started this inquisition of sorts where they just sought out Muslims and wanted to start these offensive jihad wars, when it was the opposite. And I don't even know how they can square that with history, but since they don't read or do any research, they've made this claim that Crusaders were offensive wars against Muslims, and Muslims had to protect themselves. And it's just nonsense. But many people have fallen prey to this. And I believe I did we have a Crusades YouTube video on our channel, and I start out my video by talking about Mormons and how they were yelling at me about the Crusades. And I asked them what year it was started, who started it, who was the Pope, and all these background questions. They couldn't answer a single thing, and they hated something that they did no research on and knew nothing about.
Fake news, I guess you could say, that's out there. And people think they're experts because they see a video on YouTube or something and they know everything about like the Crusades. But you ask them basic questions and they just have a blank stare because they never really looked into it.
Yeah. And in fact, it was so enjoyable, I have to say, that the Mormons, they had such a blank stare when I asked them what year the Crusades happened. And they had such a blank stare when I asked them who the Pope was at the time. And they had such a blank stare again when I asked them what the historical circumstances that led up to the Crusades were. They just, deer in the headlights, shrugged their shoulders. It was priceless. But, these people hear these things and they get so emotional about it. But no one ever does a lick of research about them except for a few things they hear. Like, as you said, a couple of YouTube videos, a tweet, the movie Constantine, or eye roll, whatever, So, there's not a lot of real research that's going on with this topic, or with the topic of Islam. Even with topic of Islam, it seems to be taboo, and all of a sudden somehow Muslims have become nice and Christians have become mean, even though it's been the opposite in the entire history of humanity as long as they've existed. In fact, I have like a 1,000-page book. And it's called The History, might be 2,000 pages. I don't know. It's huge. It's like this thick. And it's called The History of Warfare. And it talked about the word assassin comes from Islam because Islams were the ones who invented assassins to just assassinate people. Like, it's fascinating if you just understand the history. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's a shame. And you were talking about being kicked off TikTok. It's like if you try to defend Christianity or point out some difficulties with Islam, it's like the media acts against you, so it's even more difficult to get the truth out because you're not only fighting the opponents of Christianity, but you're also fighting social media, which is also just as anti-Catholic.
Exactly. And all of my, I had never got more than like, I don't know, it was really good if my videos got like 30,000 views, and that's rare. But I was starting to get over 100,000 views on several videos because they were on Islam. And all those babies reported me because they didn't like the truth. Instead of just grappling with it, discussing with it, they're like, oh, we just don't like this. And we know if we'll report it, they'll take it down. Just so instead of being intellectually honest, they were intellectually dishonest, and they, in a sense, pulled a jihad. And so,
right.
So I've decided to go to war on other platforms that do accept it, and I will preach the truth against Islam there. And I may have some people on my channel who really are experts on Islam, and I'm probably going to have them talk about jihad in detail, some of this history in more detail and that sort of thing, because it is really very interesting. I don't know. I find the history of the world very interesting and what's, happening. In fact, Islam was at a point where they probably could have taken over the world anyways, despite a couple of their setbacks with, Charles the Hammer Martel. Not many people could stop the Muslim armies. They were fierce, they were very advanced, and they were very good. Especially they had the best naval army in the world. The Navy in the world. And I don't know. It was really infighting, them fighting
Yeah.
each other, civil wars. Even at the last possible moment where it seemed like they were going to take over the world, just two camps just broke out and started fighting each other, and they both went to war against each other, kind of wiped out each other. And that's really the only thing that stopped them sometimes. Maybe it was a god, snapping his fingers or something. I'm not sure. But, I just find it all very interesting.
Yeah. 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 It's, I do too, as well. And, especially, not the sanitized version. That's boring. But what actually happens is gripping. And like you said, it's like you're on the edge of your seat because it's like, oh my gosh, they just need a couple more victories and they're there in Europe. You have Martin Luther, encouraging them to come. He thought that was like God's punishment against the papacy. I mean, what a crazy time to live in. And then yet, like
Luther was nuts too.
Yeah, so it was like God kind of said, no, you don't, and they start fighting within, and then we end up where we are today, which
with
is still
bias
kind of,
and this anti-Catholic narrative. I mean, I keep hearing the Catholic Church went to war. The Catholic Church killed everyone who disagree with them. Name one Protestant religion who's ever done what the Catholic Church has done. Really? Because I see this all the time. That Martin Luther inviting Muslims in, he himself is responsible for what's known as the peasant massacre. Even Protestant scholars and historians say that it's a huge black mark on Protestants' slate because he's responsible for basically slaughtering 100,000 basically mostly unarmed peasants. And this is the kind of person that he was, and all because they were abusing sola scriptura. And I get nothing out of this, but I love this history book set. It's called The History of Christendom. And it's by Warren H. Carroll, and it spends thousands of pages, hundreds of pages, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages just on the Crusades and on the Protestant Reformation and on others. So, I mean, it's big. There's like 6 volumes, but it's so interesting as we're talking about, Gary. So you get to see the real history before what do they call it? They change it into what it is today.
No popery, Whig history, kind of. I don't even know. I'm sure you could probably come up with a new name, woke history or something.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. But yeah, I recommend Warren Carroll's multi-volume work. He did the scholarship, and he addresses history from a Catholic perspective, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. He's pretty even. But he also isn't afraid to say, God's providence is at work, in history and point that out in the book. Really good stuff. Yeah. So what's interesting, Brian, why do you think there's so few Catholic apologists in the field? Because evangelicals, there are dozens of evangelicals ministries focused specifically on Muslim apologetics. Catholic side, except for converts, I can't think of anybody, that specializes in this area of apologetics. Why do you think that's so?
Yeah, that's a good question. Perhaps I don't really know the answer, but I have a couple guesses. My friend, if you ever want to interview him, is an expert in Islam. He speaks fluent Arabic. He goes to their conferences here in America. He goes undercover. He listens to how they want to replace the American flag on the White House with the Islamic flag, and that is their sole goal. He talks about the, something like, how they're all kind of coagulating up in Detroit. That's like the Muslim area, and there's kind of starting to make these strongholds. Yeah. Well, they want to make a lot more strongholds and start trying to attack the United States and that sort of thing. And he goes undercover to these conferences and hears them, and he's had endless death threats. I mean, he has had, what are those things called? Fatwas, given against him where, they put something on his life and that sort of thing. So, and also, what's his name? I have another book here. Robert Spencer has had endless fatwas against him. He's one Catholic I can think of who talks about Islam. Listen to what he says. This is, he's being sarcastic, but he says, this is praise and endorsement for my book. And then he said, it's by a Muslim. And it says, may Allah rip out your spine from your back, split your brains in two, and then put them both back in. And then may he do it over and over again. Amen. So, in one sense, it's really difficult to do this ministry, because if you're going to do it, you may have a lot of death threats. You may have a lot of intimidation. You may have people not like you. It's not politically correct. As soon as I start talking about it, it bans my accounts, which were reaching millions of people and not really, profitable for me at all. So I don't know if a lot of people want to deal with that. I think Protestants in some ways are more fearsome like that. They're just like, in some ways, gung-ho on fire for the gospel, and they don't care who says it, Also, we have the good archbishop who converted from Anglicanism, Nazir Ali. He's an Islamic expert. He gets pounded all the time from every direction, but he still speaks out. But I don't know if that's the reason, but that is one that I could think of, perhaps.
Yeah, I can see where clergy or bishops, that's dangerous because you could be putting Christians in other countries at risk, But for lay people, though, maybe it's just the fear of reprisals or something like that, because Islam is not an intellectually based religious system. It's really more of a matter of the will and
emotion.
Exactly. And so if you poke the bear, you are going to get at least some sort of verbal pushback. So,
fact,
go ahead.
Sorry.
No,
just
go ahead.
made me think of, I think quoted it a while ago, but I've seen it duplicated many times. I've confirmed it. And I think that 90%, or maybe it was 95% of all wars in the last century were by Muslims against Muslims and non-Muslims. So the biggest proponent of people attacking Muslims are other Muslims. So I think it was 95% of all wars in the last century were by Muslims, were by the religion of Islam. So if that tells you what this religion is like and what these people are, it's really scary. So when you see that, Islam's a religion of peace. No, some Muslims are religions of peace. Like if you look up Syria, yes, they might have Bibles and Qurans in the same classrooms, and they might read the Bible, and they're very liberal, and people know that, but that's not the norm.
Right. Yeah, very good. So we're coming to the end of the program, and I want to...
we're just getting started.
Yeah, I know. It feels like this was the introduction. Well, maybe we'll have you back on. We can continue it. Where can people go to check out your stuff and support your ministry?
Yeah, we got a new website. It's just catholictruth.org. It's no longer thecatholictruth.org. It's just catholictruth.org. And then we can find videos, they can find podcasts, they can find articles, they can bring us in to speak to any conference, youth group, organization, parents at religious education, whatever. Or you can just look us up online. You can look us up on our YouTube, Catholic Truth, podcast, Catholic Truth, TikTok, Instagram, hashtag Catholic Truth for it all. We try to reach as many people on as many platforms as possible.